Hi, welcome to the Athena in the Well podcast. This is Joy Bertrand, your host. Over the next couple of months, we're going to be retooling the podcast with the intent of hopefully getting back to a rhythm of weekly episodes. In the meantime, we're going to be talking about real life jury trials, interviewing actual jurors, and talking about trials that are in the headline. The one thing that trial lawyers do not get enough of in their training is learning from real people who served as jurors in real trials. So I'm super excited to share these interviews with you. For trial lawyers and regular people, current events are offering a lot of, how to say this with kindness, teaching moments about how trials run and the massive amount of work that goes into bringing them before the jury. We're going to be taking some of those teaching moments, and it really feels like we have an infinite amount lately, and learn together. I'm so thrilled to share this new content with you. Enjoy.
Jeff, it is April 21st, 2024 at 8:00 p.m. We're talking by Zoom. Jeff Seward, just at a full disclosure, was my literal right-hand person for several years at my law firm. Like, had all my account numbers, knew where I wanted to sit on the plane, was that guy. And then got into graduate school and moved up to Seattle, and now lives and works in the Olympia area in computer security. Jeff, it's so kind of you to come on and talk with us. We're going to be talking about your relatively recent experience as a veneer panel member in a state court trial. Thank you for coming on. As you know, the one thing trial lawyers don't get to be is jurors very often, and we rarely get to have candid conversations with the jurors that we do interact with. So this helps everybody, the good, bad, and the otherwise. So Jeff, it was in Olympia that this trial was?
Yeah, it was in Olympia State Court.
Okay, and if you know, do you know if this trial was going to be for a misdemeanor or a felony? I have no idea how Washington works.
It was going to be for a felony, just because of the amount of damage that was done, and also driving under the influence.
Okay, so it was a DUI, alcohol and drugs, or just drugs?
Just methamphetamine.
Okay, I mean, that's plenty. I have questions about that too that I might ask you as we go along here, just because these DUI drug cases are of growing investigatory interest to us. So you get your jury summons in the mail, and when you first get your summons, what was your response? Mine's always
my first response. No, seriously. So I get my summons, and I went, yeah, there's no way in hell they're seating me. There's no way. The moment they find out that I worked for a law firm for 5 years and, had worked under trial lawyers, there's no way that I would think that any prosecutor or defense attorney in their right mind would seat me.
Right. Why is that? Why would you think that they wouldn't want to have you on the panel?
Well, because it's kind of a mixed bag. If you think about it, working for the defense, I have intimate knowledge of the kind of techniques that we use and employ to, I wouldn't say win over a jury, but so much as help the jury understand, what happened and why our client either needed defense or, if there was some other mitigating circumstance that brought the client to this exact point in time. And for the prosecution side, they know that I'm well versed in the crazy crap that, prosecutors will pull, strategically forgetting things that needed to be disclosed at the right time, or trying to play games with words because they figure the average juror isn't going to be able to understand what they're saying. And realistically, it's like, nah, I know your legal jargon. I know what you're up to. But
right.
That means I also know what the defense is up to.
I'm thinking you're also listening for all the stuff that's left out, like, because you've been to the pretrial hearings where they're deciding what evidence comes in and what doesn't and how it's going to be framed. And so I would think also able to be like, weird that they keep skipping over this part that goes from arrest and then a different booking photo with different clothes, like all those things that I can imagine. If I'm a prosecutor, I'm thinking, Oh, I don't want someone who kind of is at least putting it together in their own mind that there's gaps, and there's always gaps in a
Well,
criminal.
and especially in this case where they also laid out that there were going to be issues surrounding the blood draw that was done. And I'm sitting here going, oh man, do I want to be picked for this? Yes, I do. Are they going to pick me? There is no way in hell. Because again, not even just having, the experience in law, I also have, masters of science after my name. And right then and there, they know that I'm a researcher. They know that I'm going to understand the things that, I would expect to see from a scientific standpoint. Like, it's a perfect trifecta of there should be no way in hell I end up on this panel. Like, they should take one look at me and be like, him. Yeah, no, just go. All of us agree. Get out of here.
Well, I ended up on a second day of veneer for a homicide after disclosing up front that I was a trial consultant, that I did criminal defense work, that I taught for Jerry Spence. And I was like, you really want me to come back the next day? Okay, now it's on.
Right? And I sat there and I'm just like, they're not striking me. They're not striking me at all. Oh, like you could see, like, there were immediately, like, there were people that they were just like, they're like, nah, you're not going to work out. Nah, you're not going to work out. And they're having them leave, like, right off the bat. And even when I sat there and I disclosed that I worked 5 years in criminal defense and civil litigation, and, even, wrote a program that helped analyze juries, they kept me on. And you could just see, like, the defense attorney's eyes go, I'm not sure how I feel about this. And the prosecutor kind of just looks at me like, okay, this might actually be helpful here.
Oh, hey, so here's a question out of the gate, because this is something that's coming up right now with the Trump jury selection that I think, God knows I'm the last person to defend something one of his lawyers does. But there's been criticism in the press about the background work that's been done on the veneer panel, to include looking at their social media accounts and that kind of thing. And as you know, in our firm, I'm not disclosing any secrets. Our attitude is the ABA says that is a standard of practice. Like, you should be doing this if you can. And we had a whole system for being able to background people, at least with public information.
Yep.
And yet I was shocked, for example, when I was on a panel, it was clear no one was doing any of that. Like, they were all just working off a legal pad in the moment. And I got to tell you, like, sitting there, I'm like, I'm a jury consultant and I'm already, like, running through my checklist. None of you are doing any of what you're supposed to be doing. Did you see them doing anything like that? Did you see anyone, like, furiously typing? Any questions about people's social media?
I didn't. And part of me wonders, just what the limitations are in that courtroom. For example, even just my experience, with the different courts that we worked in, sometimes all you got was a name and an age. Right. And that is really hard to find anything based on that. Like, you didn't get a city. Like, we kind of had an idea of, like, what zip code they could potentially be in. But I'm sorry, but when you have a name like John Smith, there could be 2,700 John Smiths in metro Milwaukee area. Like, right. Right then and there, it's like you don't have the resources to pull that one John Smith. But realistically, like, if neither side was doing that, then they're fools. Because realistically, I mean, let's be real honest, the number of things that you can see on a person's social media profiles is going to tell you whether or not, very, very quickly, if they're going to be a biased or unbiased juror. Like, I hate to say it, but, if when it came down to, if all you see are MAGA posts and free Trump and witch hunt stuff, there's no way that person is going to be unbiased, because they've fallen so far into the cult of personality. They are going to do everything that they can to get seated on that panel. so that way they can acquit him. On the other side, if you see nothing but he's a crook, he's a liar, Trump for prison, this, that, the other, there is no way that that person is going to be unbiased either. Like, and the whole point of our system is that we get as close as we can to an unbiased jury of our peers to determine whether or not the law has been violated. And that's a fundamental constitutional right. If I ever ended up on trial, that's what I would hope would be afforded to me.
Yeah, and I think, people, I was struck that the press has been so like upset that how dare these lawyers, look at publicly available stuff. Like this is like, to me, like, you're the one who put it out there, folks. And
aren't they the same people who will go after people's Twitter accounts for what they said, though? Like, come on, double standard here. Like,
totally. It's okay when they do it, but just like the idea that it's sacrosanct in a courtroom when it's actually something that is the standard of practice. I think it's really important.
Well, and I think what also is really important is that no matter how the trial goes for Trump, if there was as close to an unbiased jury as possible, and I hate to say this, if there was an unbiased jury that acquitted him on all charges, then that's the system. That's how it's supposed to work. And, I mean, the court of public opinion and the court of law are two very different courts. One of them has rules and standings and procedures, and the other is however people feel that fucking day.
And the reasonable doubt standard is no joke. I mean, that's something that is not a technicality. Reasonable doubt is an extremely difficult standard to meet when properly litigated.
When like, especially like in the early days of his trials, because this was something that I followed a lot. And especially in my master's program, talked about it a lot, regarding the information that you see out there and what's bullshit and what's not, which, by the way, UW has an entire course called, what is it called? Discerning bullshit is what it's called. It's an entire master's level course that's about reading media and figuring out what's bullshit and what's not. It's a really cool course. But one of the things that I always said is that, the court of public opinion during the whole Russian collusion trial was that Trump was this criminal mastermind that was pulling at all of these strings. But at the same time, he was also this absolute moron who could barely butter his own bread. And it's like, what is he, Schrodinger's dipshit here? Like, he's magically a criminal genius and a moron at the same time? It's like, look, don't get me wrong. I think he's just smart enough to know who's useful, but he's also just dumb enough not to know who's looking out for their own.
I think he's just dumb enough to be used by others. I don't think he's...
And that's what happened. That's, if you look at all of the people that got convicted around him, Trump legitimately didn't know that all of these guys were just using him for the name to get their own gains. They're, even Bob Mueller's report said, look, there were some issues around obstruction of justice, but there was never any finding that Trump was anyway privy to some of the Russia shit.
Right.
But the court of public opinion never dropped it, and they still haven't.
Well, and I think the hard thing with that, just sort of little side thing here, is that's what makes Trump so dangerous, though, is he's not able to appreciate when he's being used. And that's why I think when he, gushes about Putin and Erdogan, he means it, and he has no idea. They're laughing at him. They think this is a hoot. They could have never imagined someone this ridiculous willing to carry the water for them as far as he has. I think he really is such a narcissist that he doesn't understand that he's the one being played. And in the course, he's doing a lot of damage, but I firmly believe that he thinks they're his friends. And this is going to be like the ultimate version of world politics Mean Girls when this all blows up. Because
it's going to be fantastic. No, and so to kind of get back to his current trial, I mean, realistically, if neither of those attorneys are doing the kind of background necessary to vet that you have an unbiased trial, because let's be real honest, if it comes out that the state managed to vet nothing but a bunch of, Trump's a crook
Mhm.
2024 people on the panel, and they convict him, and that ends up coming out, that verdict gets tossed
Right.
ultimately. And so, then what you end up doing is you end up proving Trump right, that it's a kangaroo court, that they just sat a bunch of people who actually didn't like it. And so the best thing you can do is background everybody as much as possible. Get rid of the far right, get rid of the far left, get rid of the people who are overtly political.
And it's shocking they were able to find 12 plus 6. Like it's amazing that they can find that many, but there's still undecided voters too. Like it's crazy. Right. So in your case, you didn't see them doing any type of backgrounding, any questioning about people's social media that would flag it for you. And by the way, I just want to know, you were the one who found in a trial we were backgrounding people. The guy hadn't talked at all. I won't name the case, but the guy hadn't talked at all through the whole veneer panel, and everyone in the office had gotten so many people to research, and you sent me the screenshots of this guy's white supremacist, really scary postings. And had we not done that, he was in the strike zone. He would have been on our panel. And it's because we did have this process, and you took it seriously and really combed through people's social media. And this guy was open about it. Like it was shocking how open he was.
Yeah, no, he was. I won't go into any of the details about it, but yeah, the fact is that it was so blatant. Like that's one of those things where you can't miss that kind of stuff. You can't, because I think and Joy, maybe you can speak a little bit to this, is I think that there's going to come a point where if people who go through the system find out that you aren't going through people's publicly available information, you might find yourself, staring down an IAC.
Right. It's ineffective assistance to counsel. I agree. And I also think that, this is a firm culture thing that we had, that, my clients always got my best suit. Mm-hmm. And whether it was a public defender appointee or a private hire client, everyone got my best suit and my polished shoes and our best work, because we had to face them, regardless of what happens in the courtroom. We're what we can control. And for me, that is just an integrity thing. And it's also about, I'm not going to say a love of the craft, but a commitment to it. And if we're going to say, I work in the system and I trust the Constitution-based democracy that we've created to include jury service, then I need to make sure I've done every part of my part. And we have certainly had many outcomes where we have said we did our part.
Right.
That's the only part of it we could control. Right. And so I think it is really important from that perspective too, that we owe it to our clients to really embrace what is available to us in jury selection, respect the privacy of people in terms of not digging beyond what's publicly available, but definitely seeing that work as in service to the system that we have to work within, not ego driven, not based on anything other than in service to the client and to the court. So what was your initial, you're going and you have sat in conference rooms and in psychodrama groups with like the best of the best, talent wise, training wise. What was it like to go into a regular state courtroom where odds are you weren't dealing with that level of training and passion? What struck you about the prosecutors? I'll start with them first because they go first.
One of the things that struck me about the prosecutors was, it seemed very superficial, the work that they were doing. They were looking for immediate connections to the individual. Like, did you know him? Were you friends with him? Do you happen to know, what his case is? Have you read anything about it? Like, it was so surface level that, like, there was, based on her line of questioning, there was nobody that would have been struck based on what she's. I think ultimately she struck people based off of their education level and their potential work background. But outside of that, there wasn't really a whole lot there to try and figure out these 40 people that are sitting here, which of these 40 people do I actually want?
Right. And I mean, you see that with, I'll say, the majority of prosecutors that don't see voir dire as an opportunity to draw anything else, which I've always thought was weird. I'm like, why don't you want to know? Like, I don't know if it's this entitlement that they just think that they're entitled to a conviction, so it doesn't matter who's sitting there, or if they really don't get that the importance of letting the jurors speak, and that includes asking questions that will prompt them to speak.
I have a different theory, honestly.
What's that?
My theory, and the more that I've thought about this, and I started going back mentally through the trials that we worked together, and when you look at the group that ultimately ends up sitting on a jury, they're usually much older, late 50s to 70s, because the younger generation who might sympathize and understand with them weed themselves out through financial hardship more often than not.
They have to work.
Yeah. And so you end up with a group of people who are typically older, typically more conservative, typically more, blue lives matter, typically more trust the police, trust the prosecution, that side of things. So in a lot of cases, they tend to see that group of people who is going to be there as the sympathetic pool. And so I honestly think that a lot of the times they don't feel like they have to weed people out, because people who financially can't justify sitting a trial, no matter how much they might want to do it, are just going to weed themselves out. Like, luckily, like, I work for a company that would pay for me to sit on a jury if I ended up at trial. But if I didn't have a job at all, $45 a day plus gas mileage, I wouldn't be able to pay the bills on that.
Oh, totally.
And
I
so,
have a friend that had a trial in Los Angeles who said that, in Los Angeles is huge, that there was a woman like commuting like 2 hours each way on the bus to get to this trial. And in California, it's Los Angeles County, like they'd maybe get in 2 hours of testimony a day.
Right.
Because of the court congestion and all this stuff. And it was such a disservice to these jurors to not respect the commitment they're making. So what about the defense counsel? Was it just one lawyer?
Just one.
Okay.
And
question one, could you tell if they were a public defender or not?
I could not tell if they were a public defender or not.
Okay, good.
Which honestly was like, that was kind of interesting point number one, because I didn't feel like, the way that she started talking to the panel wasn't this, all right, let's try and figure out, let's try and get this turned and burned as quickly as possible. She actually stood up and she spoke with care and with thought. Her voice was measured. Her tempo was measured. It was soft and permission seeking. It was really interesting to watch, because I'm sitting here going, okay, I've seen a few of things here before. And it's like, now I'm intrigued.
Right. Isn't it funny to be the observer and yet also the participant? It's like really a weird thing to kind of, like, there was a part of me when I've been in a veneer panel that's just a little bit detached from the whole thing, but yet completely engaged in it at the same time. Did you get a feeling she was TLC trained, or did you just get a feeling she was just likable and warm?
That's the tough part. I couldn't tell. I don't think she was TLC trained, but it also wouldn't have surprised me if maybe she knew TLC lawyers. And, maybe, was TLC curious. So, because there were some things where I'm sitting here going, permission seeking is not one I typically associate with most other defense attorneys that I have met.
Yeah, we tend to be kind of bulldozers.
Yeah. And there's a time and a place for that. And I really wasn't expecting to see the methods that she used employed at a state court level.
Okay.
Like I really wasn't expecting that. I was honestly figuring that, this was supposed to be essentially a 3-day trial at most, and that they were just going to turn and burn and get this thing started and moving.
Right.
And, she took her time. And it was really, I was actually kind of like enamored with how she was conducting herself, because it was
example.
So there was an older gentleman that sat 3 seats over and 1 up from me. And so, she starts with the question of, and she starts with a few other questions about, who here has been the victim of an accident. You get some hands raised, and she makes some notes, and, okay, tell me a little bit about that. Tell me a little bit about that. Tell me a little bit about that. Goes through each of the individuals and gets to this guy. And this guy, says, yeah, I've been in an accident. And was the person under the influence? Yeah, they were under the influence. Were they under the influence of drugs or alcohol? Alcohol. Okay, well, this person was still under the influence, but as we've said, it involves methamphetamine. Do you think you can be, an unbiased juror when it comes to, your own personal experience? Yeah. So she's got this guy talking, right? Which is always step one. Like and this as well as I do, the jurors who don't talk, those are the ones that worry you, because, number one, people innately want to be helpful. They really, truly do. But when they're not talking, it's that worry of what aren't they saying? So she got this older gentleman talking. He hadn't said 2 words the entire time we were all there. Then she gets into, well, have any of you been the victim of a crime that involved methamphetamine?
Oh, half the panel.
Well, and this guy raises his hand again, And so she asks, what was the crime? And it's it wasn't, half of them weren't even crimes. It was just like, I saw a homeless guy on the street who was tweaking, and it made me nervous. And it's like, okay, well, that's, again, do you think you can be,
Paradise Valley, probably, but yeah.
Right. But it gets to this guy and asks him about it. He's a construction worker. And apparently, he owns a small construction business, and apparently he had a guy that he hired that ended up started using meth and ended up destroying part of the job site and stealing a bunch of his tools.
Sounds pretty messy.
It was very messy. And what ended up happening, and she gets to asking, she gets to digging in a little bit, and she says, so how does that make you feel, knowing that, you've got somebody here who just destroyed a bunch of stuff because he was high on meth and driving, according to the court, but also knowing that you've had this experience? Like, do you really think that you can be an unbiased juror when it comes to something like this? And he said, well, I definitely think I can be unbiased. And she picked up something in his tone and said, it sounds like you have more of an experience with this. Talk to me about it. And he just starts talking about, how much it hurt him, how much it hurt his business. And she said, you really want to be on a jury panel and do your civic duty, don't you? He's like, yeah, that's what we're supposed to do.
And we're supposed to say we won't be biased because there's so much social pressure to not be biased.
Right. And then she says, but do you think that this is the right trial for you to be on? And he pauses, and he actually kind of starts to tear up a little bit, because now she's picked up on something. He's struggling. He's an older gentleman. He is struggling with this concept of, I'm supposed to do my civic duty.
Mm-hmm.
But he's now also realizing he can't be an unbiased juror. So he's having a hard time separating out this idea that, doing your civic duty, in this case, just means showing up. It doesn't mean being sitting on the panel.
Right. I tell people now, I haven't, since you went to graduate school, I've added to our voir dire that I just say, look, before I got married, God's truth, I didn't know power tools. And if you summoned me to court and put in front of me an unput together IKEA dresser and said, your job today is to put this dresser together, that's your civic duty, I would do my best. I would end up with a bag of screws and stuff, and it would be wobbly and kind of like my dresser was at home, and like where I never did figure out how to put the top on. And I was like, I would do my best, but if my job is to put together IKEA furniture, I don't know that I'm the best person for this job. I have actually had jurors in voir dire say to the prosecutor after I've gotten them out, and they're like, I can't put together this dresser for you.
But that was the to me, that was the most soft and gentle approach that this defense attorney did. Was she gave him permission to say, I can't be unbiased.
Right.
And more importantly, got him to actually say, I'm not the right juror for this panel. Got him to actually say it.
Oh, that's great.
Did
that prompt other people to then start talking?
Yes, it did. It's prompted about 4 other people to start talking about their own experiences. And so what went from, and so then you could watch the prosecutor go, crap, can I rehabilitate these jurors? And she couldn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so you had people that had these innate underlying feelings, and some of them, being in the older generation, were very dead set on doing their civic duty because, that's the mentality that we grew up with, that we were taught. Like, you get called for this. This is an honor. This is, what you do as a part of a democracy. Mm-hmm. But could not bring themselves to understand that even just the act of showing up was your civil service.
Yeah.
And that even if you didn't get sat on that panel, that was your civic service. You did your civic duty.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. And I think that's something to remind lawyers about, is to just tell folks, like, by coming here, responding to the summons and showing up and being honest today, you've done your job.
Yeah.
You've already shown us you're different from a lot of people, but you don't have to carry this cross if it's not the right trial for you. Trust me, there will be others.
Mm-hmm.
How did she handle? You said there was a blood draw problem. Did they talk about that in veneer or in voir dire at all?
They didn't get into that at all.
Okay.
What they did say is that there were going to be some issues around the blood draw, specifically around, I believe it was the testing. And of course, and so of course I'm sitting here going,
say more. Right.
Tell me more about this, or can you? And the prosecution wouldn't go into it. But by the time this defense attorney had gotten this one guy to start talking, got 4 other people to start talking, she got 4 people to tell their stories about things that had happened to them. One gal, she had a brother-in-law that got killed by a meth addict. There was one gal who had a brother who was a police officer that, had his cruiser hit by a meth addict. There was another guy who, he had, I think it was a family member that was a meth addict, and got all 5 of them to say, you know what, this ain't my trial.
Interesting. None of that came out of the prosecution's voir dire.
No.
None of those, so it really shows the power of good voir dire questions and the acceptance of people as they are, not trying to sell them on anything, not trying to make them into somebody that they can't be, to just take people as they come.
Yeah. Because the issue wasn't that, there was this person that was going to have a trial in front of them. The issue, and it was far more nuanced, was how has meth impacted your life? How has that impacted your story? What pain has that caused you? And what does that mean for your ability to serve? And I mean, for somebody like us, it might seem like a standard question, but I mean, it wasn't even a standard question for the prosecution. They wouldn't want to ask, all right, how many of you have dealt with, somebody who's a meth addict? Okay, do you think you can be unbiased? I mean, if any prosecutor asks that question, the defense is going to go, okay, timeout. So y'all have experience with people with meth, right? Okay, can you really be unbiased?
Well, and even then, though, it's funny you should say that, because even in the work we do,
Mm-hmm.
when we had the office, 7th Avenue, McDowell, we called that Circle K Meth K for a reason. Meth in urban areas and in, I guess, rural areas too. But I mean, you can't live in a big city and not have meth impact your life one way or another. Whether it's just, I drive to work and I see the people just completely off their nut at the bus stop. I have to be extra careful. We had to install extra security, and it's all because of that. Mm-hmm. It is no laughing matter. And the fact that it took, so by the time they got to the defense voir dire, the judge had talked to all these people, told them what the case was about, asked them if anything they've heard so far maybe makes them prosecutors have done a kind of a cursory job of talking to these people. So it's late in voir dire by the time we're actually getting real about people's life experiences as it applies to this kind of case. Mm-hmm. And that's a really, I think, important thing for lawyers to be reminded of, that voir dire is not perfunctory. It is really important, and it is your job as a lawyer, the leader in the courtroom, to make sure people have the space and the permission, like you said, to talk about these real issues. And it's so funny because it's the exact opposite of what, we've heard plenty of lawyers say. I won't name names, or they're like, oh, well, yeah, you're going to get bad answers. I want the bad answer. I want the absolute worst answer you can give me.
Right.
A, you need to go. But B, we have to have the conversation. Like Don Clarkson said, what you're not talking about is already out of control. So let's have it out. Let's talk about it. And so many lawyers are still afraid of getting the bad answer, or saying it's going to turn the rest of the jurors against me. Then you get a new panel. You can't run from these questions, and you can't, if these issues scare you, trust me, they're going to be a problem if you don't talk about them.
Because I mean, even that one person who had a brother-in-law who was a cop that had his patrol car hit by somebody who was on meth. Yeah, it wasn't her experience directly, but the family went through something because of that. Mm-hmm. And that in and of itself is more than enough reason that person should not be on your panel if they don't excuse themselves.
Right.
Or, sit down and say, I can't be unbiased. Then it is absolutely your job to make sure that you strike them, because that one person already is coming in there with a lot of emotion and a lot of feeling that they didn't realize that they had, maybe because it had been how many ever years. But just because it had been maybe 10 years ago, there's still a very strong emotional impact that happened to that family in that moment.
Oh, sure. Sure. It's just kind of like the client prep work we would do, where we'd be like, let's have you flood now and freak out now in the safety of our conference room, so that you don't get flooded by this on the stand. It's the same thing with, let's have this out now in voir dire, so that you're not back in deliberations and thinking, I don't know that this was a good case for me to be on.
Right.
It's too close. And, even going back to the Trump trial, like the people coming in a day later after having a chance to think about it, that's got its own weirdness to it. But saying,
Right.
I thought I can't do it. And being very emotional about it. And you can tell, like, caring enough. And I think one thing for those of us listening that aren't lawyers or just listening out of curiosity, you're going to end up on a veneer panel at some point. It is so important to just be honest. I don't care what pressure people are putting on you. Just be honest. If it's not a good fit for you, even if it's just, I don't like the way this feels, it feels creepy, I don't want to do this, just say it. Because it is much better to say it and have us either excuse you or send you back down to jury administration for a different panel than it is to have to do it over.
Yeah. And, and I've heard, a lot of people say, things like, I don't want to be responsible for somebody else's life if that means that life is going to be spent in jail. I've met plenty of people that, they firmly believe in, trial by jury. They firmly believe that, that it's a constitutional right that must be protected. But for that individual person, like the idea of, potentially freeing somebody who's a killer or potentially sending somebody to jail who is actually innocent, they don't want to have that burden on them being that person that jury member who signs their name, to the verdict.
Right.
And I don't blame them.
And it's okay. I think, there's so much weird social pressure that gets created in bad voir dire where people feel pressured to say, of course I can be fair. And you hear that usually from the prosecutors and judges trying to rehabilitate jurors. Of course I can be fair. It is unrealistic to believe that there are just neutral people that are just, beige walking around. You cannot be beige by the time you are an adult. I mean, your personality is fixed by the time you're 4. So you already have life experiences in a lens through which you see things. You shouldn't be fair about everything. That is a weird thing to impose on people. And it's much better to just be honest with yourself and say that, or to be like, no, it's fine. It just really doesn't rattle me. And, the Backpage voir dire went on for days and we had to talk about all kinds of things. And it was refreshing. The number of people are like, I can see graphic. We're all adults here. I don't, you don't need to dance around and be all weird about things. But there are some people that were just like, I will be so distracted by this and so weirded out. I can't do it. Fair. Totally fair. I've lived with this Discovery set for 4 years, and I'm going to tell you, there's parts of it that still make me cringe.
Right. Right. I mean, there's parts of the Discovery sets of cases back I look at that still make me cringe. And then,
and that's just living in life. You shouldn't be a good fit for every case.
No.
Period.
No.
So what else? What struck you? Like anything else that you were dying to tell the lawyers that you couldn't?
I think, for me, having sat through it, like, the difference, between can I be an unbiased juror, for me, it was, I do think I could have been a truly unbiased juror because, number one, just because I worked criminal defense and civil litigation doesn't mean that I'm going to agree with that particular defense lawyer. Like, let's be real honest. We all knew some defense lawyers who pulled some stuff that we were just very cringy about. And I think other people don't understand is that, even as even as part of criminal defense and civil litigation, we have relationships with prosecutors' offices because, part of understanding, what, appropriate justice looks like is having those interpersonal relationships where we can sit down and say, you know what, let's work on this one together. Let's see if we can't, get justice the right way and not, burden the people's courts with things that don't, might not necessarily need to go to trial if we can get all the parties together and agree. When we work with our clients, it's, we're advising them with the, as best as we can on what the best outcome looks like. And yeah, we have to have relationships with prosecutors. It's not if we ain't buddy buddy or chummy chummy with, a lot of them,
Nor should we be.
nor should we be. Just because we work defense and civil litigation, nobody should view our position as inherently right either. It's really what it comes down to is the common person's understanding of the law. Because at the end of the day, that's who we have to share our case with.
Well, and it's so important that you say the common person, because Jeff, that's the whole point of jury service. It is the ultimate democratic tool. It's one of the last we have left.
Yeah.
I believe Spence when he says juries are the last check on corporate and government power. Like this is it's hugely inconvenient for people, but it is also, and I know, I'll say this in closing more than voir dire, this is maybe the most powerful you ever are.
Yeah.
And then you start sitting with it and appreciating and respecting what this process is. And there's plenty to laugh about. Trust us, there's plenty to laugh about. But ultimately, when we see this as the founding fathers saying, this is how we check in criminal cases, this is how we check government power.
Yeah.
In civil cases, this is how we check power against corporations or against a lot of the work we did against the government.
Yeah.
And we have to have juries. I want juries. And I've had plenty of discussions going, back and forth about, do we want a court trial? Do we want a jury trial? I err towards jury trials because that is what the Constitution demands. And, we were chatting and catching up before we went on to record here. And it really goes back to this breaking down of constitutional democratic structure that we have to, I think, if we're going to get our hackles up about just about anything, and there's plenty to choose from, get your hackles up about this. Protecting the right to a jury trial is where it is at, just like protecting the judicial selection process and ensuring we have qualified judges is so important, because while it's that one person's trial, the ripple effect of a jury verdict, it goes back to the prosecutor's office. It goes back to the insurance company. It goes back to the police department that gets its ass handed to it. It does change, and it is an opportunity for regular people to give a vote. And sometimes the defense loses. Sometimes plaintiff loses. But when it's a fair fight, and you've heard me say this, if it's a fair fight, you won't hear me complain like is when it's not a fair fight.
Absolutely. And I think there, like you said, it's one of the last vestiges that checks the power of the three branches, and it checks the power of the branches at your state government too. Like, with you, we worked mostly federal, but people also need to understand that even at the state level, whether you live in a state where, the House, the Senate, and the governorship is controlled by, the conservatives or the liberals, it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, when we go to trial, we're still fighting for the basic constitutional rights that were guaranteed to us, starting as far back as, the forefathers imagined, because we were the victims of unfair trials. We were the victims, and and when I say we, I mean the common people. For things as silly as not getting a stamp in order to get sugar or a newspaper or things like that, and so for the people in my home state of Montana, what opened the door to medical and recreational marijuana was a trial by jury, where the jury flat out said, we can't convict somebody of marijuana usage because we think the laws regarding marijuana usage and possession are stupid. And therefore, a common pool, a common people's pool nullified a law that they thought was unfair. And if you look at the ripple effects, of all the different states that have done, you have more than half the states that have legalized marijuana in some way, shape, or form. And the feds are fighting over whether or not they want to do it. And the states are over here telling you, look, we're doing it whether or not you agree with it.
Mm-hmm. So anything else, anything about the judge and how the judge handled the jury that you'd want to tell the judge if you had the opportunity?
I think when it comes to the judge, and especially in, places where, like especially in the city, you're just hoping to get enough people to show up. Like, let's be real honest. Most places are just hoping they get enough people to show up. And even in the run up to the jury service, where we had to, before we even go out and sit down, we go through, what is a jury and why is it our civic duty and how did I get called, and just the basics of what a jury is. The lady who makes sure that we're all signed up and signed our stuff and filled out our information really took the time to just thank us for even showing up. That it's hard to get enough people to show up to get a proper panel in place.
Mm-hmm. It goes back to that. Your duty sometimes is just showing up.
And so I think and unfortunately this is neither here nor there for either defense or the prosecution or the plaintiff or the defendant. The problem is having all of the people able and available to sit on a jury. I really do believe that a lot of unbiased jurors are lost simply because they can't afford to sit. And I think what if I could tell the judge anything is I would simply tell him, you're losing well qualified individuals to sit on a jury because they can't afford to be here. And that is in my mind a miscarriage of justice.
Truly is. And actually there's now, I know Maricopa County has like a long-term trial fund to make it a little bit more palatable for people. I think its trial goes longer than 2 weeks, maybe, because this came up with that homicide case I was on the veneer panel for. But it's still like $150 a day. That's if you're the sole breadwinner, that's not going to do it.
No,
it's just not. And that's before childcare and doctor's appointments and all the other things about living. So I think that's really important to hear from a regular person is like, if you guys want better jury pools and you want people to show up for jury duty in the first place, you've got to make it survivable. Like you can't bankrupt people with a summons. And we are losing, like you said, so many qualified, earnest people that want to serve, but it'd be devastating to their families and themselves.
And especially when you look at the statistics around the number of people who are, one missed paycheck away from living on the street.
Yeah.
Now those people are being asked to come in for jury service. A lot of those people are one missed day away from either losing their job, losing the ability to buy groceries for that particular week, medicine. And that's the unfortunate part about this is that I do sincerely believe that you would probably find yourself a much larger. I mean, for us, it would make our jobs harder because we would have more jurors to go through, to sort through, to make sure that we're getting as much information as we can on them in order to find out whether or not they are capable or qualified to serve.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are, just by nature of the fact that we can only, the people who have jobs aren't going to do it because they have a financial hardship. And the people who are going to do it are retired and they don't have to worry about their source of income. Like that should say
government employees, like it becomes a very cool. Yeah.
Like, And that should alarm not just defense attorneys. It should alarm the prosecution as well. Like, especially if you know that you're going to have a lot of people who are going to be able to sit down and go, nah, that dude was really in the wrong here. I mean, come on, this is really common knowledge at this point that if you're going to do this, this is the outcome. You know,
yeah, it would make a self-defense shooting case like that get dismissed. It was exactly that. I'm like, I mean, come on. But yeah.
Right. And that's, and I think that's really what's unfortunate here is that, you know, if either side, if either side could wave a magic wand, that would be the one that they should wave. The idea that we would have the ability to have more unbiased jurors available to us, that right there, I mean, like I said, it would make our jobs a lot harder because we're not going to have as many people weed themselves out. But on the same token, if I know that there's a larger chance that I'm going to get 12 unbiased jurors sitting on a panel to decide, especially if I'm the one that ever ends up needing representation, I would be happy knowing that there is anybody from 18 to 80 that is going to be able to sit on my trial, and they're going to be able to sit there and focus on my trial and not think about whether or not they're going to get to keep the lights on for their kids.
Right. Oh, for sure. I really do. I mean, it's kind of like in the vein of saying voting day needs to be a paid holiday, period, and stop, so that people can vote. They don't even have to worry about work versus vote. We've definitely, found other ways to address that with mail-in voting and stuff like that. But I think it's the same idea. Like we've got to make participating in our democracy as easy as possible, not as difficult as possible.
Agreed. And unfortunately, what we're doing is we're making it difficult. And in some ways, I would make the argument, because the system is the way that it is, we are selecting a biased pool.
Well, we're definitely not getting a diverse pool. I mean, it's sometimes that's just by the community you're in. Like we've tried cases like Prescott and
oh god
and Camp where it's just like I'm the tannest person in the room, and it's really bad when you have a client of color sitting next to you. It's really uncomfortable, and part of that's just going to be the demographics of the community. But if, in addition to broadening from whom we poll jurors, we make it as painless as possible to be a juror, I think that would be a very interesting shift in how juries are comprised. And I think you're right. I think it would definitely give both sides, they'd have to definitely tweak some of their conventional wisdom about who's going to be on a panel. Like in Maricopa County, we know just by the demographics of Maricopa County, it's going to be 30 to 40% LDS. It's going to be older. It's going to be primarily Republican, but conservative, I mean Goldwater Republican. I don't mean what we've got.
Right.
And that's a different mindset from a Milwaukee panel, from a Los Angeles panel. And if we can say to the working class in particular, and like you said, younger people that have families, like the people who have to work right now, we want you, and we will make sure, whether it's, I don't even know, we could brainstorm, income matching or just, flat fee, something. And that's kind of goes beyond the world I work in, but I think you're so right. That one thing that we really have to talk about systemically is who is systemically not included in jury panels, because there are a lot of existing biases within the system that control for who ends up on the panel. And even the best voir dire in the world isn't going to get you people of other worldviews if they're not even coming into court.
Or they can't stick around because, if they're late for their shift again, they're going to get fired. Right.
And, should that be the case? No. Is that people's reality? Yes.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, Jeff, on your day of jury veneer service, given what
Oh,
you sat through and experienced, and especially with I'll call it the training, like the contact high of TLC and
yeah. You know,
all the work
I,
that you did.
I will say this. One of the things that we worked on when I was there working with you was, this concept of giving people permission. Giving them permission to protect the client, giving them permission, empowering, giving them permission to have, that empowering moment that stands up for your client. That when you immediately follow up and start asking questions and giving people permission to start talking. As I said, people inherently want to be helpful. They don't necessarily always know how.
Mm-hmm.
And so the people that this defense attorney managed to get, have themselves say, I'm not the juror for this panel. She gave them permission to tell their stories, to share their emotions, and to ultimately say, I've done my civic duty by showing up. I am not the right juror for this panel. That permission, that permission is very powerful. And, I had seen us do it time and again. Being completely removed from it for a few years and then watching that organically, that works. It does work.
And it's not a shtick. The beauty of it is it's not a shtick.
No.
It really is just a genuine conversation with people and being the person to say, if you haven't heard it from anybody else, you can just tell me. I'm good with whatever comes next.
Yeah.
I just want to know.
And by empowering those jurors to tell their story and say they can't be on that power, you empowered the other jurors who were there to maybe take a softer look at your client and find out a little bit more, to maybe ask some questions, to share, what thoughts they might have later on. I don't know how that trial turned out, but she got that pool talking. And that's, yeah, exactly. That's half the battle.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time on a Sunday night to talk with me about jury work. As you know, it's a passion of mine, and I firmly believe this is where cases are won and lost, and it's a lost art for a lot of lawyers.
I'm glad to catch up with you and glad to share what I got to witness.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff.